do this,
I know. It's all wrong. By rights, we shouldn't even be here. But we are. It's like in the great stories, Mr. Frodo. The ones that really mattered. Full of darkness and danger they were. And sometimes you didn't want to know the end. Because how could the end be happy? How could the world go back to the way it was when so much bad had happened? But in the end, it's only a passing thing. This shadow. Even darkness must pass. A new day will come. And when the sun shines, it'll shine out the clearer. Those were the stories that stayed with you. That meant something. Even if you were too small to understand why. But I think, Mr. Frodo, I do understand. I know now. Folk in those stories had lots of chances of turning back, only they didn't. They kept going. Because they were holding on to something.
what are we holding on to, Sam?
There's some good in this world, Mr. Frodo. And it's worth fighting for.
Hi, my name is Stanislav Costiuc and I am a game designer. Today we'll dissect the console and PC version of The Lord of the Rings: The Return of the King movie tie-in game released back in 2003. For the purposes of saving time, in this video I will assume that you have watched my critique of the previous console tie-in, The Two Towers. Some things may lack clarity if you haven't, so I highly recommend doing so. The link is going to be in the description and YouTube cards. The shortest way to describe the Return of the King game is that it's The Two Towers on steroids. It's bigger, has longer levels and more of them, more characters to play as, more epic moments, more action, more mechanics, more clips from the movies, more of everything really. But does bigger mean better? Let's find out as we dissect the game using my Stasocritic system. And as always, the first category we start with is design. This category has a weight of 4, because the design, structure, mechanics and their implementation is the most imperative part of enjoying a video game. Return of the King doesn't change anything in terms of pillars and loops from the Two Towers. What it does is make tweaks and add new things upon the foundation laid by the previous game. First and foremost, this is manifested through many little improvements in the core gameplay that add to the overall polish of the combat system. You can now hit enemies that are falling down, there is no delay between pressing the aim projectile button and the animation starting to play. If a shielded enemy has been hit by someone else, you can still destroy the shields. If you're a bit too far from a downed enemy, then the killing move will automatically bring you closer. All these little things that make the overall solid core gameplay of the Two Towers even more enjoyable. The animations are also much clearer. Some Uruk-hai in the Two Towers had death animations where they actually tried to stand up, and in the case of battle that was creating confusion if they were dead or not. No such clarity here. The enemy attack wind-up animations are also more sprawling and noticeable, though it makes them slightly longer as a result, but that doesn't hurt the game. What does though are the changes made to the combo system. Even though it was fun, in the Two Towers video I have mentioned all the flaws its combat system had in terms of balancing. Return of the King not only doesn't improve things in this area, it also makes it even more disbalanced and sometimes worse in comparison. When it comes to button presses themselves, Return of the King has all the same combos as the Two Towers, with the only changed one being Bane counter moves. Now it's just a combination of parry and kill and blow, rather than parry, speed attack, kill and blow. And 2 new combos were added, Helm's Hammer, which is 3 fierce attacks in a row, and Swift Justice, which is 4 speed attacks. The change that has led to the largest unfortunate chain of events for gameplay is removing the area of effect damage at the end of a combo. Its main purpose was to even the playing field for characters with different reach, so a short-armed Gimli wouldn't be punished for not having the long arms and long sword of Aragorn. Its secondary purpose was to reward successful combos by speeding up the entrance into perfect mode. Since the combo meter is based on hits and doesn't care about damage, the area of effect attack would give a considerable bump to the meter. Without this area of effect damage, entering perfect mode through combos is much more difficult, since the game only detects the direct collision between your weapons and the enemy model. This gives an unproportionally large importance to animations, and that leads to a number of weird effects. Let's take the Orc Hewer combo, the bread and butter speed attack, fierce attack. Gandalf, who has a long staff and does a 360-degree pirouette when using this combo, hits a simply massive amount of enemies around him, so he can actually enter perfect mode by just running into a crowd of enemies and using this combo. Aragorn, despite his long sword, can't because his Orc Hewer animation is a jump attack that affects only enemies directly in front of him, so he can hit 2, maybe 3 of them. And then there's someone like Sam, who does perform a pirouette, but he's a short hobbit with a short sword, which already hurts his reach, and during the spinning animation he raises his hands up, so he doesn't really hit anyone until the end of the combo, which results in successfully striking 1 or 2 enemies, and that is if they don't happen to jump out of the way first. So this leads to a situation where you actually don't want to use combos, because standard speed attacks or fierce attacks can have larger reach than the fancy combo moves. And this is again best shown with the example of Sam. By just using his speed attacks, he can kill an Uruk in 4 consecutive hits, with the last one being struck where the enemy is in the air being knocked down. When you get the Swift Justice combo though, the 4th hit becomes a combo hit and it receives a longer animation, so now Sam misses that 4th hit window even though you do the same button presses. Then there are cases like a combo working fine on Uruks but working less fine on Easterlings just because their fallen animation is a bit different. Also, even though you can now hit enemies who are falling off their feet, you still can't hit enemies who are lying on the ground. In the 2 towers, knockdown enemies would still get hit and damaged by the area of effect attack. In Return of the King, your weapon strikes the ground and nothing happens. The only way to interact with the fallen enemy is to do a killing move. The irony of it all is that thanks to Return of the King changing the enemy composition, more combos would be useful in comparison to the 2 towers. There, you were forced to use particular combinations because of a large amount of shielded enemies in many situations, so it was better to try and not use combos with several speed attacks. In Return of the King, shielded enemies are put in big groups only in the post-game gauntlets. In the actual levels, with a couple of exceptions, they're put 1 or 2 at a time, alone or within a group of otherwise unshielded enemies. So a combo like Dark Deliverance, which is fierce attack, fierce attack, is less likely to be cancelled due to the amount of shielded enemies. But you still wouldn't really want to use it as the animations aren't always effective at finishing the orcs off, and it doesn't meaningfully help with achieving perfect mode. All that said, in Return of the King it is easier than ever to activate perfect mode, due to 2 additions. First, the counter moves now instantly activate perfect mode, which means you don't even need to do combos to achieve a perfect score. All you need is just wait for an enemy to attack, even if that means leaving some civilians to die, and you can do some powered up perfect kills, most of which are still done best with just speed attacks. Then 3 special abilities were added, spread around all characters. Gandalf has a protective magic shield that damages all enemies on touch, the hobbits have elvish cloaks that make them invisible for a certain period of time, and everyone else has an enrage mode which increases damage and combo meter effectiveness. The shield and enrage mode are alternative quick ways to get into perfect mode, while hobbit cloaks are useful only for 1-hit stealth kills, which don't cause the combo meter to fill up. So overall it is actually quite useless as an ability, the hobbits are better off just openly attacking and then using the Bane counters. While these mechanics make it possible for everyone to enter perfect mode quickly and get a really huge amount of perfect kills, They feel like a crutch that exists just because combos aren't as effective anymore. And then after you do get into perfect mode, you would not want to use combos necessarily. The last move still can't be transformed into a parry should you need it, so unless your character has efficient animations like Gandalf, it's best to just mash the standard attacks and avoid combos altogether. The area of effect attack had a third purpose of ensuring a moment of respite between moves, which is absent here. In general, Gandalf is the most rounded character in the game, overpowered even. He has the most efficient animations, some of the best projectile attacks, only slightly worse than Legolas's when fully upgraded, great range, fast killing move, a very useful ability that allows you to just run into a crowd of enemies to enter perfect mode, even though it does have a pretty long wind-up animation, but that can be accounted for. Because of that, Return of the King feels best when playing as Gandalf, but that is just because when controlling him you don't see how everything else in terms of mechanics bursts at the seams. With all other choices, the game does try to create differences between everyone, even all the 4 hobbits. For example, while Merry is faster, Pippin is stronger, and so on. But despite the design being focused on creating various playstyles depending on who you get to play as, it doesn't feel as differentiated as in the Two Towers, since your playthrough is going to get focused around counter moves and enrage abilities, rather than combos and other differentiating factors. If the core combat systems of the game are a mix of great improvements and disappointing stepbacks, the levels are definitely an absolute star in Return of the King. The foundation is still centered around having 2 types of levels, arena-based and progression-based, though there are some levels that mix the two. And honestly, playing Return of the King, you'll find it difficult to not get reminded of missions from the Two Towers. Top of the wall is the Deepened Wall, focused on similar ladder pushing mechanics and preventing Uruks from overrunning the battlements. Minas Tirith Courtyard reminds a lot of the Breached Wall, wave after wave of enemies that you need to defeat while having a defend objective. The road to Isengard is really similar to Fangorn Forest. It helps that a part of that level actually happens in the same forest. Cirith Ungol is Amon Hen. You need to defeat a certain amount of orcs and then fight their captain. But missions in Return of the King are deeper, more varied, each one is unique in a certain way, and even those that are clearly inspired by the Two Towers levels aren't carbon copies and improve upon the concept set up in the previous game. One of the biggest factors that has led to this is the addition of interactive objects. In the Two Towers, all levels were designed to be just fought in, and all interaction was limited to things that you could do through fighting. Return of the King adds many different kinds of objects that you can use with a dedicated button. So even though the Battle of the Last Alliance from the Two Towers and Helm's Deep from Return of the King are similar in concept, both are tutorial levels that introduce you to all the main moves of the game in an environment where you can't die. In Battle of the Last Alliance you just fight orcs within a confined area, while in Helm's Deep, well, you also fight enemies within a confined area, but you have progression. Start on the field beyond the wall, then you have to climb it up to use your projectile attacks, after you can slide down a rope to get back on the field beyond the wall and use ballistas to finish off the Uruk-hai army. It's easy to see which one would be more involved. Similarly, if you look at top of the wall, besides the main concept that it takes from the Two Towers, it also has siege towers you have to stop, and you can do that either by shooting them directly or commanding a catapult. There's a Nazgul and a Fell Beast from which you have to protect said catapult, ropes that you can use to reach different areas of the wall while avoiding enemies and even push some ladders too. It's so much more grand and there are more actions you get to do within the level. Return of the King takes that concept of each mission having a certain twist and goes all the way with it. As you escape as Gileath, you need to make sure you don't stay in open rooftop areas for a long time, otherwise the Nazgul will snatch Frodo. In Cirith Ungol you can use many different traps to help you kill the Uruks, including a huge chandelier that you can drop down on enemies. Boss battles for the most part are much better too. There's different stages that include additional behavior for the boss, they change their actions throughout the fight, and are also much more involved than the Two Towers where each boss needed just one strategy. Though sadly there are a couple bosses like that here in Return of the King too. The most annoying of these is Gollum. What you have to do is essentially just push him over the ledge and then do the killing move to try and make him fall. Rinse and repeat while environments crumble down around you. The first time I fought him, I could never understand why I couldn't put him in his about to fall down disbalanced state, only Sam could. And then while replaying the level later, I realized that he loses his balance only if you attack him with speed attacks, while I used a lot of strong attacks since that's what actually pushes him over after he loses the balance. A very rigid battle. Of course, there had to be that one level in this game as well, and it's the Pelennor Fields. You have to run around between different cliffs, which by the way, why would fields have cliffs, but I digress, and destroy the Mumakil before they trample Eowyn and Merry, while also making sure to fire at the Witch King soaring above them so he wouldn't kill them either, all while constantly being attacked by Uruks and Easterlings. Honestly, this level is not particularly difficult with the best projectile upgrades, but you're unlikely to have those the first time you reach Pelennor Fields, so it is very frustrating regardless. In general though, levels in Return of the King are great. Besides the layer of interactivity that vastly improves variety, they also feel much more expansive thanks to the addition of climbable ladders. That verticality really matters for creating a sense of epic scale. Post-game content is not that different from the Two Towers. You have not one, but two 20-floor gauntlets, Palantir of Saruman and a much more difficult Palantir of Sauron. Lack of area of effect attacks is really felt here, as these are the two levels that will send tons of shielded enemies at you, but also you can just abuse the hell out of the Bane moves. There are also 3 unlockable characters this time, and while they are essentially reskins of existing ones, they do have some speed and damage changes to make sure they're not total clones like Isildur was of Aragorn. The game is still pretty short, but it feels more well-paced and better connected, so you don't get this feeling that you're just jumping all over the place from set piece to set piece. And I don't have anything else of note to say regarding Return of the King's design. Based on everything I have said, I will assign a score of 7. It would have been almost an 8. Levels are great fun and the combat system has a lot of improvements to the core mechanics. But Return of the King has even bigger inconsistencies and imbalances when it comes to the combo system than the Two Towers, to the point that you're better off not doing combos a lot of the time. And that's just too big of a but for a game centered entirely around battles and, well, combos. Now, let's discuss context. This category has a weight of 1 as it's about something that enhances the experience but doesn't necessarily define it. Plot, characters, motivation, themes, etc. And like with the Two Towers, we'll rate everything just based on what the game does by itself, without relying on the source material, except seeing as this is an adaptation of a sequel, assuming you know information from the first 2 movies isn't going to be penalized in any way. What Return of the King does very well is framing. Everything is essentially told through Gandalf's perspective and his plan to defeat Sauron. Now, I gotta say, this does transform him into more of a master planner than he was in the movies and the books as well, where of course he was cunning, but still the character was more about giving hope and inspiring others. He knew what had to be done, but decisions on how to do it were much more organic. Here in the game though, absolutely every event is painted as part of Gandalf's master plan to create and spring a trap for Sauron. But it works within the confines of the game as it creates clear plot threads that make it understandable on a general level what is going on. There's a plot thread of Frodo and Sam going towards Mount Doom to destroy the ring and being betrayed by Gollum on the way. There's a thread of Gandalf dealing with Saruman and defending Minas Tirith until Aragorn, as part of his plot thread, swoops in to save the day by summoning the army of the dead. And then all that converges in the end at the Battle of Blackgate and Crack of Doom, with the ring finally getting destroyed. Of course, the understanding you'll get is mostly informational. There is no character arcs to speak of, no drama or suspense, and I wouldn't say any of the themes from the source material are actually explored. Some things may feel like they come out of nowhere, like Gollum bites Frodo's finger off, but why Frodo had the ring on his finger in the first place is never explained. Or at the Battle of Blackgate, everyone assumes at the beginning that Frodo is dead, and yet Gandalf mentions that this is their final chance to give Frodo time to end everything. Twice.
For ourselves there is no hope. This is our final act to give Frodo time to end this evil that marshals before us. For ourselves there is no hope. This is our final act to give Frodo time to end this evil that marshals before us.
So should we open up the scores for context, I will assign a 5 to the game. It creates a nice framing that connects everything in such a way that you will overall understand the chain of events that happens and ultimately leads to Sauron's demise, but it doesn't go deeper than that. Let's move on to aesthetics. This is another category with the weight of 1, as it's also about something that enhances the experience but doesn't necessarily define it, this time through visual style, music, sounds, etc. And we will not spend much time in this category, as I will talk mostly about things that are different from the Two Towers. Like its predecessor, Return of the King does a fantastic job of recreating the atmosphere of the films, this time with even higher animation quality, a more in-depth music system that changes the soundtrack not only based on your combat state but also the location and some particular actions. There are many more barks that prevent things from sounding monotone, the level selection menu is a grand, beautiful hall filled with tapestries, and in general there are a lot of advancements in quality to an already high-quality title, aesthetically speaking. Also, Ian McKellen is clearly much more excited to voice Gandalf as a narrator than Viggo Mortensen was as Aragorn in the Two Towers. In fact, Viggo doesn't return to provide his voice in this game, and honestly I'm not surprised. It's better not to force people to do things they really don't seem to enjoy. With all that said, there are still a bunch of things that lack polish. A big one is lip sync. Some characters have it, some don't. Weapons disappear for some characters during certain actions to avoid them going through their body, but for some other characters, they don't. Sometimes Return of the King is too overzealous with special effects to the point that you literally can't see what is going on. And if you open up the scores for aesthetics, all this leads to me assigning a 9. The game is fantastic visually, atmospherically, in terms of sound design, acting and music, but there are just a bit too many noticeable things that create a certain sense of polish lacking, and that's a shame. Now it's time for Cohesion. This category has a weight of 2, and it's about how well all different elements are connected together to create a wholesome, holistic experience. And look, I think we can open up the scoring system straight away and assign the same score as the Two Towers, 6, for all the same reasons. While the game has a fantastic Lord of the Rings skin, it doesn't feel like it provides a solid adaptation, a Lord of the Rings experience in game form. But what Return of the King is, just like a console version of the Two Towers, is a great movie tie-in experience. Let's talk about the last category, emotions. The most subjective category of Stasocritic, but with the second biggest weight, 3. It's all about personal feelings, but in the end, it's these feelings that matter. Unlike the Two Towers, Return of the King is a game I have actually played back in 2003 because it was released on PC. You can't imagine how many hours I've spent in that game. I literally brought every character to level 20 back then. As a child, I didn't care about any of the flaws the game had. I was just extremely happy to immerse myself into the world of the Lord of the Rings and also see scenes from the upcoming movie that I was really waiting for. Even now, being older and seeing all the game's flaws that I now do as a professional, there is one thing I can't deny. It's still just as fun. This is why if you open up the possible scores for Return of the King, I will assign a 9. Like the Two Towers, the game doesn't do enough to create emotions so powerful that they transcend the gameplay experience. That part is left to the movies themselves. But still, Return of the King is just extremely enjoyable. Let's summarize everything. With all scores and weights taken into account, the console and PC version of The Lord of the Rings: The Return of the King gets a final Stasocritic rating of 71. It's a good game. As long as you're willing to accept some flaws, you will have great fun with it. Especially so if you're a fan of The Lord of the Rings like myself. There is really no reason for you not to try out this game if you haven't already. It's epic, atmospheric, and highly enjoyable. Like the Two Towers, Return of the King was actually released alongside two absolutely different tie-ins. One for Game Boy Advance and one for mobile phones of those times. You'll find links to my videos about them in the description and YouTube cards, be sure to check them out too. Thank you all for watching. Be sure to leave your thoughts about the Return of the King game in the comments below, and don't forget to like and subscribe. A special thank you goes to all my patrons who make these videos possible. If you'd like, feel free to check out my campaign at patreon.com/Farlands. Your support would mean a lot. Thank you.